People always warned me about strangers. Watch out for the ones you don't know, they'd say. Keep your doors locked. Don't trust a smile you haven't earned. But nobody ever warned me about the danger that walks through your front door on your own son's arm, wearing a white sundress and calling you Mom before she even learns your last name. My name is Margaret. I turned 64 last October, in a house that has been mine for 31 years. I raised my son in that house. I buried my husband from that house. I planted every rose bush in that front yard with my own hands, and I know every creak in every floorboard from memory. When people ask me to describe myself, I tell them I'm a retired school librarian with bad knees and excellent patience. What I don't tell them, what I have never found reason to tell anyone, until now, is that I also quietly own 43% of the regional real estate development firm that my son believes he built from scratch. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My son called me on a Tuesday afternoon in late spring and told me he had someone he wanted me to meet. His voice had that particular lightness to it, the kind I hadn't heard since he was 17 and trying to hide a report card. I told him to bring her to Sunday dinner. He said she didn't eat red meat. I said I'd make salmon. He said she preferred her salmon prepared a specific way. I said I'd make pasta. He laughed, and I laughed, and I thought everything was going to be fine. Her name was Vanessa. She was 31 years old, effortlessly beautiful, and she assessed my house the way a contractor assesses a building before demolition, methodically, room by room, with a professional detachment that she almost managed to disguise as admiration. She told me the kitchen had good bones. She told me the living room had potential. She held my grandmother's china teacup up to the window and turned it in the light without asking permission, then set it back down half an inch from where it had been. My son watched her do all of this with the expression of a man watching fireworks. I watched her do all of this and thought about patience. They moved in 6 weeks later. My son came to me first, sat across from me at the kitchen table the way he used to when he was 12 and had broken something, and explained that Vanessa felt the commute from their apartment was too long. He said it would only be temporary. He said it would give us all a chance to bond. He said Vanessa had some ideas about updating the house that I might find really exciting. I looked at my son, this 40-year-old man, who still held his coffee cup with 2 hands like a child, and I told him he was welcome home whenever he needed. Because that's what you say. Because that's what mothers do. Vanessa arrived with 14 boxes, 2 interior design catalogs, and a very clear set of opinions about where everything should go. The first month was what I would call the grace period. She was careful then. She complimented my cooking while suggesting small improvements. She rearranged the living room while I was at my Tuesday book club and explained afterward that she just wanted to open up the space. Wasn't it better now? She introduced me to her friends as my son's mother rather than by name, a distinction so small and so precise that I almost wondered if I'd imagined it. I hadn't imagined it. I have excellent pattern recognition. 30 years of watching teenagers try to hide things from librarians will sharpen that particular skill considerably. By the second month, she had moved my reading chair from the bay window where I had sat every evening for 22 years to the far corner of the sunroom, explaining that the light in the morning was better there and that the living room needed the window space for the new lamp she'd ordered. The new lamp was tall and aggressively modern and looked like something designed by someone who had never actually sat and read a book. I moved my chair back. She moved it again. I moved it back a second time and said nothing further on the subject. The chair stayed by the window. This was apparently the wrong response. My son began coming to me with concerns. Vanessa felt that I was being resistant to change. Vanessa felt that since they were contributing to household expenses, a contribution that amounted to $200 a month toward utilities in a house where I paid every other bill I might consider being more collaborative about shared spaces. Vanessa felt that I sometimes made her feel unwelcome in her own home. That last phrase stopped me cold. I kept my face very still. My son was watching me with an anxious hopefulness that broke something small inside me, and I understood in that moment that she had been working on him for quite some time, carefully and consistently, the way water works on stone. I told my son that I loved him. I told him I would try to be more open. I said goodnight and I went upstairs and I sat on the edge of my bed and I thought for a long while. The next morning I called my attorney and my oldest friend, a woman named Carol who has known me since we were both 26 and struggling and entirely certain we would change the world. Carol has been a real estate attorney for 35 years. She is small and precise, and absolutely ruthless when the situation calls for it, which is one of the things I have always loved most about her. I told her I needed her to update some paperwork for me. She asked what kind. I told her the kind that would make certain things very clear, very quickly, if the need ever arose. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "How soon?" I said, "Whenever you have time." She said she'd have it ready by Thursday. I did not tell my son about that phone call. Things progressed through the third month and into the fourth with an efficiency that I had to admit was almost impressive. Vanessa was not stupid. She was, in fact, quite intelligent. Intelligent enough to be strategic, to escalate slowly enough that each individual incident seemed minor, to ensure my son was present for her warmth and absent for her coldness. She had clearly done this before, or she was a natural, and I was honestly uncertain which option troubled me more. She told my housekeeper, Dorothy, that she would be handling the household schedule going forward and that Dorothy should check with her before acting on any of my requests. Dorothy had worked for me for 11 years. Dorothy came to me that evening with an expression of profound discomfort and relayed this information word for word because Dorothy is fundamentally honest and knew I would want to know. I thanked her. I told her to continue taking her direction from me. I told her I would handle the rest. When I informed Vanessa the following morning that Dorothy reported to me and that this arrangement would not be changing, she smiled at me with great warmth and said, of course, she hadn't meant to overstep, she was just trying to help. Then she went upstairs and told my son that I had spoken to her very harshly and that she was starting to feel unsafe in the house. I know she told him this because my son came down 40 minutes later and asked me, with visible pain, why I had upset his wife. I looked at my son and I thought about all the ways I could answer that question. I thought about 31 years of the specific kind of love that is only possible between a mother and a child she has watched grow from helpless to capable, to now, somehow, this. I thought about what it means to wait. And I said, very calmly, that I had not spoken harshly to anyone, that I had simply clarified a household matter, and that I loved him and wanted him to be happy. He nodded and went back upstairs. I poured myself a cup of coffee and I sat at my kitchen table in my kitchen in my house, and I thought about patience some more. Carol called me 2 days later to confirm the paperwork was in order. I thanked her. I put the documents in the fireproof lockbox in my bedroom closet, behind the winter sweaters on the top shelf, and I continued to wait. The incident that I think about most happened on a Wednesday in November. My son was traveling for work 3 days in Atlanta, a development project that I had quietly helped capitalize 18 months earlier, though he believed the funding had come from his business partner. Vanessa had her friends over for what she described as a casual dinner. I had not been consulted about the dinner. I had not been invited to the dinner. I came downstairs at 7 in the evening to find 6 strangers in my living room. My good china on the table, not the everyday set. My grandmother's china, the pieces she had brought from Ohio when she was 19 years old, and Vanessa explaining to her friends that she and her husband were in the process of making the house their own. I stood in the doorway for a moment. One of the friends looked at me with mild confusion. The way you look at someone you think might be the cleaning staff. Vanessa looked at me and said, sweetly, that she hadn't realized I would be joining them, and that there wasn't really a place set for me, but she could have the kitchen put something together. I want to be precise about this moment, because I think it matters. I was not hurt. I was not humiliated. I was, for the first time in many months, entirely certain. Something settled in me with the finality of a door closing. I looked at Vanessa. I looked at my grandmother's china on my dining room table. I looked at these 6 women who had been brought into my home by someone who did not own it. I said, very pleasantly, that I hoped they enjoyed their evening. I said goodnight. I went back upstairs, and I called Carol. I told her it was time. Carol asked me if I was certain. I told her I had been certain for several weeks, and was simply waiting for a moment that felt unambiguous. She said that sounded like me. She said she would be there Friday morning. I said that would be perfect, as my son returned Thursday evening, and I preferred him to be present. Thursday night, my son came home tired and travel-worn, and Vanessa made a production of welcoming him back, and they sat together in the living room watching television, and I made tea and brought them both a cup without being asked, because I am still his mother, and that has not changed and will not change regardless of anything else. My son looked up at me when I set his cup down and said, "Thank you, Mom," with a softness in his voice that told me some part of him, buried under everything she had built on top of it, still knew that something was wrong. I told him to sleep well. I told him we needed to talk in the morning. He looked mildly alarmed. I told him it was nothing frightening. I went upstairs and I slept better than I had in 4 months. Carol arrived at 9 Friday morning. She was wearing her dark blazer, which is what she wears when she means business, and she was carrying a leather portfolio that I recognized from her office. She had brought a second attorney, a younger woman named Priya, whom I had met once at Carol's firm's holiday party, and found impressively sharp. Vanessa came downstairs first and found the three of us at the kitchen table. She looked at Carol. She looked at Priya. She looked at me. For the first time since she had walked through my front door in that white sundress, she did not immediately know what expression to put on her face. It lasted only a second, that blankness, before the warmth reassembled itself. But I had seen it. She asked if everything was all right. I told her to please sit down and to please ask my son to come downstairs. She stood very still for a moment and then went to the bottom of the stairs and called up to him. My son came down in his pajamas, looking confused and slightly frightened, the way he used to look when he was small and woke up to find something happening that the adults hadn't explained yet. He looked at Carol and said her name with surprise. Carol had handled the legal work on his company's founding documents. He'd always liked her. I asked everyone to sit down. Carol opened her portfolio. She placed 3 documents on the table, each clipped separately, and she explained in the measured and unhurried way she has been explaining legal realities to people for 35 years what each one was. The first document was the deed to the house. The house had been mine since my husband and I purchased it in 1993. My husband passed in 2009. The house transferred to me in full at that time and had remained solely in my name since. This was not news to my son, though I suspect he had not thought carefully about its implications in quite some time. The second document was a shareholder agreement, dated 8 years ago, representing my 43% stake in the firm my son had co-founded with his business partner. My son had needed capital. I had provided it. At his request, the arrangement had been kept quiet. He was proud, and I had understood that and honored it. My stake had never been transferred, never been diluted, and had in fact grown considerably as the company grew. Carol set the document down and slid it across the table. My son stared at it. He had known about this, once, in the early days, but 8 years is a long time, and people remember what they choose to remember, and I think somewhere along the way the story he told himself about his company had quietly edited me out of it. The third document was a formal notice. Carol explained that given the circumstances of the past several months, she had a written summary, professionally prepared, with dates and documented incidents. Because Carol does not do anything halfway, I was exercising my right as sole property owner to request that the additional occupants vacate the premises within 30 days. She noted that my son was, of course, welcome to return as my son at any time, and that this action was directed not at him but at the living arrangement as it had come to exist. The kitchen was very quiet. Vanessa spoke first. Her voice was still controlled, but only just. She said that this was unbelievable. She said that she was my son's wife, and this was his home too. She said that I had clearly been planning this for months, and that it was manipulative and cruel. And she looked at my son as she said it, measuring his face. My son was not looking at her. He was looking at the shareholder agreement. He was reading it with the careful attention of someone who is understanding something for the first time and recalculating a great many things at once. He said, slowly, that he hadn't realized. I said that I knew. I told him I had never wanted him to feel indebted to me. I told him I had made the investment because I believed in him and because I had the means to help and because that's what parents do when they're able. I told him that the arrangement had been his idea, the privacy of it, and I had respected that completely. He was quiet for a long time. Vanessa said his name. He didn't respond. He asked me why I hadn't just told him. Not about the company, about the house, about how things had gotten, why I hadn't come to him sooner. I told him the truth. I told him that every time I had tried to talk to him about what was happening, he had come back to me with her version of events. I told him I had needed him to see it for himself, and I had needed enough documented evidence that it couldn't be rewritten afterward. I told him I had not wanted to destroy his marriage. I told him I had wanted him to understand. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at his wife. She had assembled her expression back into something softer by then, something wounded and bewildered, the look she had been deploying on him for months. But he had just spent 5 minutes reading a legal document that quietly rearranged the architecture of everything he thought he knew, and I think some structures, once they shift, cannot fully settle back into their original position. He told her they needed to talk privately. She said that was fine. They would get through this together. She had never meant any harm. He said he knew. His voice was careful in the way that voices get when a person is working very hard to keep them level. They went upstairs. Carol poured us both coffee from the pot I'd made earlier, and we sat at my kitchen table and waited. Priya checked her phone. Dorothy, who had been moving quietly around the edges of the kitchen since Carol arrived, catching pieces of the conversation, came and stood near me for a moment and put her hand briefly on my shoulder and then went back to her work, and I was grateful for that more than I knew how to say. My son came back downstairs 2 hours later, alone. He had changed out of his pajamas, and he looked older than he had that morning, in the way that a few hours can sometimes age you when the hours contain the right kind of information. He sat down across from me. He said he owed me an apology. He said that looking back, he could see things he hadn't let himself see while they were happening, and that he was sorry for that. He said it quietly and without drama, and it was so entirely like him, like the boy he had been before all of this, thoughtful and direct when he wasn't being managed, that I had to look at the window for a moment. I told him there was nothing to forgive. I told him people we love have the ability to shape what we see, and that's not weakness. That's just being human. I told him I would always rather have him home alone than not have him home at all. He almost smiled. He asked if I really had been that angry about the china. I told him it was my grandmother's china, and yes, frankly, I had been that angry about the china. He did smile then. Small and tired and real. Vanessa left 11 days later. Not the 30 she'd been given. She had a friend in Scottsdale she was going to stay with. She did not say goodbye to me, which I found neither surprising nor particularly upsetting. She had never actually been speaking to me. She had been speaking to the obstacle she'd believed I was, and the obstacle had simply turned out to have better paperwork. My son stayed. He slept in his old room for 3 weeks while he sorted through things, and I cooked dinner every night and did not make it mean anything beyond what it was, which was dinner. Some evenings he came and sat in the kitchen while I cooked and talked, and some evenings he went to bed early, and I let him make that choice without commentary because he is 40 years old and entitled to his own grieving at his own pace. On a Thursday morning, about 6 weeks later, he came downstairs and sat across from me and asked if we could talk about the company. We talked for 4 hours. I told him everything, how it had been structured, why, what my stake actually meant, what it had grown into. He listened carefully and asked good questions, and at the end, he sat back in his chair and said that he wished he had known sooner, not because it would have changed his choices, but because he would have liked to have known. I told him I understood that. I told him that going forward, no more quiet arrangements. He agreed. We shook hands across the kitchen table like two people doing business, and then he laughed. And then I laughed. And then Dorothy came in and asked if either of us wanted more coffee with the air of someone who had been waiting a very long time for the house to sound like this again. I moved my reading chair back to the bay window that same afternoon, not because it had been moved again, but because I wanted to sit in it and look out at the rose bushes I'd planted 31 years ago in a yard that had always, through everything, been mine. People warn you about strangers. They don't tell you that the most important thing you can own is not a house or a company or a shareholder agreement locked in a fireproof box behind your winter sweaters. The most important thing you can own is your own clarity, the knowledge of what you have, what you've built, and exactly where you stand. Because the people who want to move you from your chair, from your kitchen, from your own life, they count on you not knowing. They count on the years softening you, the love making you cautious, the desire to keep the peace overriding the willingness to name what's happening. They count on you being so busy being someone's mother, someone's caretaker, someone's quiet background figure, that you forget you are also someone who once signed a deed and made investments and built something that has your name on it, even when nobody else can see it. I have not forgotten. I will not forget. The roses are blooming early this year. I can see them from my chair by the window, right where they've always been, right where I've always been. patient and rooted, and exactly where I belong.